Netflix, Perfect Match will be shown next Tuesday at 9. Now, here's Jon Snow with a Channel 4 News special.
A hijacked Boeing 767 slams into New York's World Trade Center. 2 airliners are used in the rush hour attack. The entire complex is destroyed, and an untold number of people are dead and injured. The streets of the world's financial capital are seized with terror, people fleeing in blind panic. A 3rd hijacked airliner crashes into Washington's defense epicenter, the Pentagon. A 4th jumbo crashes in Pennsylvania. President Bush is flown to a secure military base.
Freedom itself was attacked this morning by a faceless coward, and freedom will be defended.
Good evening and welcome to a Channel 4 News special after the most devastating terrorist attack in the history of the United States. 1 terrifying hour, 4 hijacked airliners, many passengers aboard. Even now, 7 hours after the tragedy began, new details and images are coming in all the time. No one knows the true scale of the human carnage. America is sealed, all borders and airports closed, communications in chaos. Here, too, all flights have been banned over central London. The financial markets are in tatters. All that news in full, and we discuss America's response and the implications for global security against terrorist attacks. An unknown number of casualties in an atrocity beyond anyone's comprehension. Tonight, America is a country literally cut off from the rest of the world, with all those international flights grounded, many turned round in mid-air across the Atlantic, and all borders closed. The attacks were launched with a devastating precision, hijacked airliners destroying the World Trade Center in New York and smashing through the Pentagon in Washington, D.C. Defense chiefs have put the country onto an emergency footing. The armed forces are on high alert. President Bush vowed to hunt down those behind the attacks. He said, "Terrorism against our nation will not stand." World leaders from Tony Blair to Yasser Arafat have expressed their outrage. Lindsay Taylor reports now on the day that America came under assault.
At first, no one can believe it, but it's all too real. The World Trade Center in flames, smoke spewing from the upper floors. A gaping hole in one of the center's 2 110-story towers. It's been caused by an aircraft crashing straight into it. It seems initially as though there's been a terrible accident. As witnesses try to understand what's unfolding, suddenly the senses are challenged beyond comprehension from the side of the tower on the left.
The whole building just exploded some more, the whole top part.
Okay.
The building's still intact. People are running up the streets. Am I still connected?
Before the world's eyes, a second plane has ploughed directly into the centre's other tower. An amateur cameraman filming at a distance caught the moment of horror.
Oh my God! Oh, dear! Oh my God!
My own eye. Just went in. Must be a tower.
Oh my God! Another
plane just went in.
Another tower.
With such images come a sickening dawning. One such plane crash might have been an accident. 2 must be deliberate. One of the USA's greatest institutions has been deliberately targeted. America is under attack. As we're fixated by the images of the burning buildings, it's impossible to imagine what is happening inside. 2 relatively large passenger jets disappear inside the huge structures. The casualties must be enormous. Then, images that will haunt for years to come. On some of the floors, survivors of the initial impacts appear at the windows. Their exits blocked by the destruction and carnage inside. All they can do is signal for help. They can see and smell freedom, but no one can reach them hundreds of feet up. With events to come, it's unlikely any of these people will survive. Around this time, President Bush vows to hunt down those responsible for the atrocity. But even as he speaks, it emerges that the US Capitol has also been hit. The Pentagon in Washington, nerve center of the US military, struck by another crashed passenger aeroplane. US establishments had increased security since the World Trade Center bombing in 1993, but it wasn't enough to prevent this. A series of blatant and seemingly unstoppable attacks. The FBI had been investigating a series of hijacks today, but by then the planes were already close to completing their deadly missions. This is the worst nightmare for the US security establishment, a strike at the heart of government and the people. But back in New York, it's not over. The first of the Trade Center towers collapses like a house of cards. Gone are the hopes of escape of those who survived the initial impact. Hundreds of tons of masonry falling to the ground, where emergency service workers, onlookers and others have been trying to help.
Everything just went black. Everything came down, glass started popping. People got hurt, stuff went on top of them. And it was a big explosion. Everything got dark, real dark, like snow. You can see behind me, oh, this is not snow, this is all from the building. It was a terrible nightmare.
Then the second nightmare. If there was panic before, it's now out of control, as an already appalling situation gets worse and worse. At a stroke, the streets of the most powerful and well-defended nation in the world are filled with fear. It's still not known who carried out such attacks or what motivation there could be for crashing planes full of civilians into skyscrapers full of people going about their lives. It's estimated the numbers of dead will run into tens of thousands, but no one yet really knows. No one can take in the enormity of what has happened. No one has the experience of dealing with death and destruction on this sort of scale. No one knows why it happened, and no one knows quite how America will respond.
Lindsay Taylor, unimaginable images from New York. So let's just take a step back and go through what happened and when. The 4 attacks were launched with frightening speed. First thing this morning, just before 9 a.m. New York time, a hijacked jet smashed into one of the twin trade towers in New York's Lower Manhattan. At 9:18, millions watching television already of the first blaze saw another plane crash into the second tower. As panic spread throughout New York, another hijacked plane slammed into the Pentagon in Washington, D.C., home of the Department of Defense. Then a car bomb exploded at the Department of State. A hijacked American Airlines jumbo jet from Newark to San Francisco also crashed near Pittsburgh in Pennsylvania, thought to be targeted at Camp David. The World Trade Center was at the heart of New York's financial district. 50,000 people worked there every day. At 7 minutes past 10 New York time, the South Tower of the World Trade Center collapsed. 20 minutes later, it was followed by the North Tower. The cost in terms of human life is still impossible to calculate. New Yorkers are describing their city as a war zone. There's already panic buying of food and water. Mayor Rudolph Giuliani said a horrendous number of lives have been lost. One of the world's most famous landmarks, the World Trade Center itself, lies in ruins. Krishnan Gurumurthy reports now on the day's terrible events in New York.
On the ground, just after 9 o'clock, the people of Manhattan still had no idea of either what exactly had happened or what was about to happen.
Move it! Come on!
At this stage, 2 aircraft had crashed into the World Trade Center towers, but nobody imagined they could actually collapse.
Yes, I was right there. I was down in the basement, came down, all of a sudden the elevator blew up, smoke. I dragged the guy out, his skin was hanging off.
I was just standing here watching the World Trade Center after the first plane hit. I just saw a second plane come in from the south and hit the South Tower halfway between the bottom and the top of the tower. It's got to be a terrorist attack. I can't tell you anything more than that. I saw the plane hit the building.
Office workers streamed out of the area, traumatized, many with no idea what had happened to their colleagues.
And we heard a big bang, building, and then we saw smoke coming out, and everybody started running out, and we saw the plane on the other side of the building, and there was smoke everywhere, and people are jumping out the windows. Over there, they're jumping out the windows, I guess because they're trying to save themselves. I don't know. And I don't know, everybody just doesn't know where to go. They won't let, everything is blocked off. You can't even, they're telling us to get out, but there's nowhere to go.
Then the unimaginable. Police, fire and ambulance workers all caught together with those still trying to leave the area as one tower collapsed, spraying tons of concrete, metal and other debris hundreds of yards. The amateur cameraman who shot this footage soon found he was nowhere near far away enough from the towers.
I mean, looking at it now, I mean, it's unbelievable. I mean, that's the only word to describe it. It's just, you can't fathom that something like this would happen, and then certainly that a 110, 107, 110-story building would just come crashing down like that. And certainly we thought, I mean, we were half a block away, and when we heard the residual explosion, people just started running.
Need some water. Here. Get the cameras out of here. Let's go. Get off now. Go.
With no idea how many new casualties they were leaving behind, many rescuers simply had to run for their lives, as did those trying to cover the unfolding scene.
All the people traffic was running up. And I'm looking up, I'm trying to call the station, trying to find where we are. And I look up and the tower just starts crumbling down. And everybody in the street just stops and started crying and bawling. And I'm standing next to a fireman, he said, yeah, they just bombed the Pentagon too.
The immense scale of this attack was becoming clear to the watching world, but down on the ground, with phone and power out, coordinating the response was already near impossible. Evacuating the complex web of densely packed buildings, painfully chaotic.
We tried to do a floor-by-floor search. New York City Police, the Fire Department, Port Authority Police, best they could, tried to get everybody out. But as you know, there were people still coming out after that building came down.
Do you have any idea how many people would normally be in the building at 8:30 or north? This is the director of the
There are
World Trade Center.
probably 10,000 people in each tower. 10,000 people in each tower would typically be in there on a normal business day. And we get about another 5,000 visitors during the course of the entire day. So by 8:30, 9 o'clock, the building should have been full.
New York's emergency services were overwhelmed. Even now, there is frankly no idea of how many casualties there will have been or how many dead. It was election day in New York. The mayor, Rudy Giuliani, suspended the poll and, advising New Yorkers to stay calm, also promised justice.
It's one of the most heinous acts, certainly in world history. And as the governor said, and I said to the president, we fully and completely support him in any action that he has to take in order to make an example out of the people who are responsible for this.
Uptown, in an amazingly unscathed Times Square, the city watched in horror on the big screens.
I've never had a feeling in the city like this. Everybody is like frozen. I mean, this is like, if they can do this, what's next?
He has perhaps articulated the fears tonight of America.
No. And now we join Paddy O'Connell again in New York with the latest news of what's happening there. Paddy.
I think, David, what's becoming clear is that this is not over. That is to say, if you look at the pictures of Manhattan, downtown where it happened, the mayor has evacuated part of Lower Manhattan. That will be no surprise. But if you think back a step as to why, it's because buildings remain unstable. This is the scene around the building that collapsed, but the question being asked is, what about the buildings that were standing immediately after it? Now, I don't, where I'm sitting in Midtown Manhattan, have an answer to that question, but I'm afraid this question is the one that's preoccupying us, because underneath the rubble is the answer to the question, how many people have lost their lives? We know there are displaced people. We know there are disgusted people all across this country, and here there are people trying to get home. But as I speak to you, David, we don't know the answer to the question of the scale of the human tragedy. The analysis, important as it is, will be had, but the figures on people. We just don't know.
This is the apocalyptic view that's been the dream of terrorists and the nightmare of security forces. The best-known skyline in the world, shrouded in the aftermath of the most audacious terrorist assault in history. Even before the smoke settles, the questions are being asked. How could two planes just fly into the World Trade Center? How could the Pentagon, the bastion of the military, be penetrated? And did the security forces have any inkling that it might happen? Experts like Andrew Rathmell from the respected RAND think tank told ITV News they did.
There certainly were warnings, and there has been a heightened state of alert for various reasons to do with clashes, for example, between the US and Iraq, relations between the US and Osama bin Laden's organization, as well as events in the Middle East in terms of the terrorism we've seen in Israel and the occupied territories. So for various reasons, there were various heightened states of alert, and the security force in the US had received various warnings. But the problem is, of course, that warnings are received frequently.
A number of planes were hijacked this morning. Two of them were American Airlines jets, Flight 11 from Boston to Los Angeles with 92 people on board, and Flight 77 from Washington to LA with 64 people. At 8:50, just before 2 o'clock here, as workers were arriving for a day at the World Trade Center, one of them crashed into the building. At 9:08, the other hijacked plane crashed into the tower, causing an inferno. At 9:30, another plane crashed on Washington, hitting the Pentagon, the nerve center of the American military establishment. 15 minutes later, the heart of American government, the White House, was evacuated. At 9:59, an hour after the first plane hit the Trade Center, one of its towers collapsed. At 10:25, over an hour and a half after the initial attack, a car bomb exploded outside the State Department. 3 minutes later, the second tower of the World Trade Center collapsed. The center has towered over New York for several decades. It imploded, showering one of the world's most populated and most important cities with smoke and debris, changing its skyline forever. In fact, in the aftermath of the attack, the Federal Aviation Authority closed down the whole US air transport system. But experts tonight told ITV News that security at domestic airports in the United States has been criticised as insufficient.
In a democracy, in a democratic society, unless you mortgage your democracy in the interests of security, then there is also always going to be some risk of security being breached.
Of the Battery Park area in which the World Trade Center sits right down on the tip of Manhattan. Manhattan itself drenched in smoke, the utter shock of it, the wounding images for President Bush himself, a tremendous, in a way, a humiliation. It's an absolutely appalling stab right into the heart of America. And David Smith in San Francisco, I mean, this is a bloody barb to thrust into the heart of the new President of the United States, who has spoken so tough on so much of this. How do you think he is going to respond?
Hijacked airliners, the targets, the very symbols of American financial power.
5 miles from the site of this absolute disaster, we cannot...
A tragic accident or a deliberate attack, as a second aircraft in the top right-hand corner here flew towards the Twin Towers. There was no longer any doubt.
Loss. I mean, do you know if there were many people in the building?
Oh, another one just hit. Something else just hit. A very large plane just flew directly over my building, and there's been another collision. Can you see it? I can see it on this shot.
Oh, my.
Something
An
else.
image that will remain forever seared on the American consciousness. A passenger jet full of people being flown deliberately into one of the world's great skyscrapers. On the streets below, utter pandemonium.
Don't worry, don't worry. Come on, where's your...
From up in the towers, the heartbreaking sight of people trapped above the flames, almost a third of a mile high, waving desperately for help that would never, could never arrive. Less than an hour after the attacks, one of the towers finally succumbed to the blast and the flames.
In blood. It looks like a lot of them were either on the floor of one of the exchanges. There's actually, oh my God! Oh my God! Oh my God!
We're
not sure exactly what happened, but it was another explosion on the far side of one of the buildings from where we're standing. The entire top of the building just collapsed. You can see the plume of smoke is coming in our direction. Let's get out of here, Ralph. We're going to leave because of...
There is no indication how many people were evacuated before the collapse, nor of how many emergency service personnel may have been caught up in the millions of tons of falling concrete, steel and glass. A few minutes later, the second tower began to crumble. "50,000 people work in the Twin Towers. 150,000 visit them on an average day. It beggars the imagination how many people may now be lying dead in the rubble of Lower Manhattan. Physically, psychologically, New York City will never be the same.
Skyscrapers, two of the defining characteristics of the Manhattan skyline. They are no more, and one can scarcely comprehend the loss of life.
Come down the steps, everything fine till we got to the basement, and then everything just fell in. I got trapped under there with another guy, crawled out, kept getting hit in the head, bounced all around. Finally, we clawed our way out over the rubble.
I was just standing here watching the World Trade Center after the first plane hit. I just saw a second plane come in from the south and hit the south tower, halfway between the bottom and the top of the tower. It's got to be a terrorist attack. I can't tell you anything more than that. I saw the plane hit the building.
And we heard a big bang, and then we saw smoke coming out.
Of the American military colossus engulfed in flames, evacuated, left impotent by the most brutal act of terrorism in history.
There was this tremendous explosion as it hit the Pentagon. I looked over, and the smoke started coming up.
The president was in Florida. He moved not to the White House, but to a strategic command center in Louisiana, from where he and his senior officers could coordinate a response.
Make no mistake, the United States will hunt down and punish those responsible for these cowardly acts.
Be seen all around New York.
Taking a look. Oh my God! Oh, Jesus! Oh my God! My own eye. Just went in. Must be a oh my God! Another plane just went in.
At that time, there would have been about 10,000 people in each tower of the World Trade Center, many thousands more in the Wall Street financial district all around. Those who could were running for their lives.
I was just standing here watching the World Trade Center after the first plane hit. I just saw a second plane come in from the south and hit the south tower, halfway between the bottom and the top of the tower. It's got to be a terrorist attack. I can't tell you anything more than that. I saw the plane hit the building.
When a big explosion happened, some guy came out, his skin was all off. I helped him out. This is him all over. There's people jumping out of windows. I've seen at least 14 people jumping out of windows. It's horrific. I can't believe this is happening.
We heard a big bang, and then we saw smoke.
And again, with dozens on board, had been crashed with devastating results. By now, smoke was billowing around Capitol Hill, and the White House was being evacuated. People were talking of a new Pearl Harbor, someone declaring war on the United States. And back in New York, the nightmare was still far from over. Firefighters were in the basement of the World Trade Center, wondering if the building above was safe. The unthinkable was about to happen. The South Tower, all 110 stories, collapsed. And it was all live on American television.
Thanks very much.
Completely collapsed.
The whole side has collapsed?
The whole building has collapsed.
The whole building has collapsed?
The building has collapsed.
That's the southern tower you're talking
Exactly. The second building that we witnessed the airplane enter.
On the ground, emergency services hardly knew which way to turn. People still trapped in the second tower had seen it all and could only wave in desperation. But it was already too late for rescue. The second tower, representing America's trade and wealth, was about to go. The Twin Towers, which took 7 years to build, had been utterly destroyed in a single morning. The Manhattan skyline and countless lives devastated.
Do not go down on the ground. You will get trapped. You will get trapped. Don't go.
Big boom. Come down the steps. Everything fine till we got to the basement, and then everything just fell in. I got trapped under there with another guy. Crawled out. Kept getting hit in the head.
Our New York business correspondent, Stephen Evans, was in the World Trade Center when the planes hit the towers. Stephen was telling a local New York television station what he'd seen when, during the interview, one of the towers collapsed behind him.
We had that big explosion from much, much lower. I don't know what on earth caused that. The thing that strikes me is, one, the terribleness of the incident, whatever the cause, and we don't go into politics, but whatever the cause, the terribleness, the hugeness of what's happened. So huge, in fact, that most of the people around simply can't understand what happened. People were just standing around, talking at each other, nodding their heads. Oh, guys, going! Oh my God! We gotta go! We gotta go! We gotta go! Oh my God! We gotta go! Right, sorry, it's going down. It's going down. Don't worry, it's going down. It's going down. From here. But you need to shoot. Sorry, it's not like... Quick! Don't go into a building. There's no game. Right, come on. Get this. We're good here.
And Stephen Evans joins us now in New York. Stephen, first, there's news that another building has collapsed. Can you confirm it?
I can't confirm that anything has collapsed, but all I can confirm is that all the buildings in that complex, that vast complex that normally employs 50,000 people, must be tottering. I think we can bring you pictures of the scene as it is now, and you will see dust everywhere. What strikes me about the pictures is that a lot of the emergency vehicles have got dust and debris on top of them, and that's because they arrived there very, very quickly indeed, and then new buildings collapsed, new devastation was caused. I don't think anybody really knew how that structure, nor could anybody know how those structures would react to an aircraft, two aircraft flying into them. So the thing now is that nobody quite knows what's underneath that debris.
How long did it take people to realise how serious the situation was, that the buildings were doomed? When you were down there when you heard the first impact, how long did it take people to catch on that they had to get out?
It took people, people immediately knew they had to get out. People immediately knew that there was something serious going on. But actually, you didn't know how serious. I didn't know how serious until, what are we now, 9 hours later. It is sinking in very, very slowly. One of the things, as I said, that happened was people got out and then simply stood at the base thinking, well, we've evacuated the building, therefore we're safe. And then literally hundreds of ambulances arrived on the scene, fire engines, whatever, and parked in that complex. One of the questions I think that will arise is how many people have died, if you like, in the aftermath of the accident. There is, if you like, a psychological aftermath to the accident as well. You might be able to see behind me Times Square, which is normally one of the busiest parts of this city. It is deserted now, partly because it's been closed off to traffic so that ambulances can get up and down this island, ferrying people wherever they need to be ferried, but also people, I think, have gone home. It's a cliche in these events, if we've ever had an event like this one, that people are shocked and stunned. but they are. The few people who are down there are simply looking up at boards with the latest news and not saying very much indeed.
Stephen Evans.